Okay. Can I put my screen to full screen? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Hi. Yeah, so am I. I really regret not being there. Yeah, it feels like a punishment for you know. I apologize collectively for our decision. It's a terrible one. Mm-hmm. Great, thank you very much.
Okay, I just do my little German introduction.
Sure.
Nach seiner These eine ideologische Mission zu erfüllen. Wir hatten es heute früh schon gehört. Die Gebäude sollten also Zufriedenheit, Freude und Optimismus hervorrufen. Das waren die Kriterien. Doch die Frage ist jetzt natürlich, welche Gefühlspolitik wurde betrieben nach dem Mauerfall in den Stadtquartieren Osteuropas, nach dem Zusammenbruch des real existierenden Sozialismus. Wir hatten es heute ja schon gehört, diese Abwertung, auch die Imageabwertung von Grünau in den 2000er Jahren, konnte man ja um sich greifen, als das Thema Shrinking Cities wirklich akut war und ganze Blöcke abgerissen worden sind. David Crowley redet jetzt über Kunst, Emotionen und Aktivismus in den postsozialistischen Stadtlandschaften Osteuropas und noch ein paar Angaben zu seiner Biografie. Er ist Kunsthistoriker, er ist Professor sowie Head of Critical Writing in Art and Design am Royal College of Art in London. In seiner Forschungsarbeit, da geht es um kritische und spekulative Designpraktiken sowie die Geschichte des Grafikdesigns und der visuellen Kommunikation. Darüber hinaus ist er Experte für Kunst- und Designgeschichte Osteuropas zu Zeiten des Kommunismus und eine Ausstellung, mit der er auch, glaube ich, international sehr bekannt geworden ist. Das war diese berühmte Ausstellung im renommierten Victoria and Albert Museum in London, die hieß Cold War Modern Design. David, so now it's your turn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I hope that everybody can see my screen okay. What I want to do today is talk a little bit, as you've just heard, about the emotional tenor or register of a lot of practices that engage with what we might call socialist modern architecture. Well, of course, Eastern Europe, as many commentators tell us, continues to be haunted by Soviet-style communism, perhaps in the way that politics is conducted, perhaps in social behaviors, perhaps also in the landscape itself. And many commentators on this theme often like to invoke Jacques Derrida. And of course, in the 90s, a French philosopher invented a very playful pun, hauntology, to reflect on the ways in which Marxism would continue to haunt the world, perhaps particularly the left-wing intelligentsia, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. This was in his book, Spectres of Marx. And he asks this question. He says, what is a ghost? And more particularly, what is the effectivity of the spectre? What can be achieved by something which is insubstantial? What can be achieved by something which is virtual? So this is what I'd like to think about a little bit today, by thinking particularly about the cityscape. And I want to spend a bit of time in Poland and in the Czech Republic to think about how the cityscape of today is somehow haunted by these ghosts from a communist past. So here's an example. This is in Krakow. It's a design for a hotel called the Nowa, the New Cracovia. It's from 2014, and it was designed to replace this building. This building is a major monument, I think, in the history of modern architecture in the People's Republic of Poland. It was a modernist hotel, probably the first building in Poland to have a curtain wall. The inside of these very striking modernist and quite often abstract decorative schemes. So the plan has been to demolish this building and to put actually something much larger on the same site. We see it here, with a much larger footprint, which will contain things like shopping mall, offices. It's a mixed development. And the scheme went through various architectural offices, but the design that I'm concerned with comes from the office of Marek Dunikowski. He's a very well-connected architect who's well known for these kind of, I suppose, largely office buildings. And the building that he proposed for the New Cracovia has quite a distinct form. It's got this mass, which is clad in stone, but in front of it is what he calls a pergola. It's structure here, this gallery-like structure, which is supposed to have a kind of historical function to talk about the area of the city, which is very significant in Polish history. And the form of the building also has a kind of echo of the combination of neoclassicism and also modernism, which was characteristic Poland between the wars. So I think in a way this scheme is about making place. It's about place-making. Very typical. Architects often talk about this. But if we just think about this structure for a little bit, it functions as a kind of box, a box for offices, retail spaces, which has been closed behind stone cladding. But in the design of the scheme, which we can see here in this night rendering, there's a kind of light pattern in the stonework which directly quotes the arrangements of windows and mullions which were in the historic Cracovia building. So on the left is the new, and on the right is the old. And it's as if the old building still continues to haunt the new structure somehow. Here's another example. This is a shopping centre and transport hub, which was built for the city of Katowice, which is in southwestern Poland. This is now the Galeria Katowicka, which is a mammoth retail unit. It's got 250 shops, parking. It's also got traces of the railway station, which once occupied the site. So in particular, what we see in the new building on the right are parts of the historic structure of the old railway station, which has been totally encased by the new building. These tapering columns and this structural work provide a kind of umbrella-like structure that the Poles call parasols. And in a way, this is one of the signatures of this brutalist building from the 1950s. It's now disappeared. This is the inside, whereas it used to be outside of the building. And the outside is now cased in this architectural blob, this big parametric structure. What's striking is the decision to keep these elements. One might wonder what is the logic of keeping these elements, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Here's another example of a kind of trace, a continuation that's found in a new building. This is the new Kino, the Prague cinema in Warsaw. And it has in its window, see them here, these low reliefs which were taken from the structure of the old cinema, which the new cinema replaces. These were socialist realist figures. Here we see the original, 1850s, and then the new cast, which is in the window of the new cinema. So what is this? What are these traces that seem to persist? These after images of socialist realism or of socialist modernism? Why are they a feature of these new ultra-commercial landscapes? A landscape which is dominated by business, of course, but also by new kinds of city authorities. Maybe we should call this like trophies, like spoiling, that these are the spoils of the victor. Capitalism triumphs over communism, and these are the symptoms or the symbols of that victory. Or perhaps what lies behind these gestures, like keeping the parasols, is a rather impoverished idea about placemaking. And of course, the contradiction, it seems to me, is pretty obvious. How can Soviet-style socialist realism or socialist modernism, this kind of brutalist language form that we see here, how can these particular architectural elements that really belong to the old regime be used to make place in the present? And of course, it's an unintended irony that this language here, particularly this brutalist language, was so often accused of being placeless. And now, of course, it seems used to make the new familiar in some fashion. Now, I think it's also not a coincidence that the buildings that I've shown you have all been the matter of some kind of controversy. So prior to its destruction, this Katowice railway station was the subject of a major campaign to save the building. There were international petitions. There was lots of attempts on social media, which we can see here. Lots of attempts to generate public interest. There were demonstrations. And in a very Polish fashion, there was also quite a lot of prayer in front of the building. Now, we see the same pattern underway in the Cracovia, that hotel that I started with. It's a pattern that's very familiar. Maybe in Germany, you can see the same pattern too. A developer, a commercial developer, promises to demolish a socialist era building. Often they will get the support of local authorities. And then in response, an alliance will form, which sets out to save that building. And the alliance is usually a kind of mixed group of maybe architects, heritage groups, sometimes community activists, often artists are involved. And I'm also interested in the anti-capitalist activists who join in these alliances. And as you can see here with this Facebook page, they make a lot of use of social media. And underpinning their activities is a very strong sense of loss. That buildings that were destroyed maybe even a decade ago continue to haunt the imagination of these activists in the present. So this is some Czech examples from a social media site which we know where we are going. This is known because these activists have seen what's happened in the past. And in particular, we're just going to look at this building here. This was the central department store in Liberec, which had been designed by the SIA group, a group that formed in the late 60s, kind of semi-independent design studio with a reputation for experimental design. And they designed really an amazing shopping centre, which was a series of these sort of discontinuous pavilions, which are connected by walkways and they have these Buckminster Fuller-like little geodesic domes on the roof. So this is a kind of early high-tech, maybe. Quite an important building in the history of architecture, in the Czech context, but maybe internationally too. But this building was acquired in 2009 by the British supermarket chain, Tesco, and it was demolished to allow a new shopping centre to be constructed. So this haunting of the past is to do with knowing the fate of particular buildings. The same site also makes a very clear accusation. These are modern interventions by the Ministry of Culture and the Czech rich. Thanks a lot. Almost hear the tone. And I think here pointing out of government is to do with a lack of trust in the planning mechanisms of post-socialist cities, that these activists see a kind of net interests at work, where politicians are somehow in pockets or in the pay of developers and investment companies. And these activists also distrust the kind of listing mechanisms which are supposed to protect historic sites. There are many examples where listed buildings have been destroyed and spent. So if we take one of these examples, this is the Hotel Praha in Prague. And we have to check the volume here. I'm going to talk over this piece of music. You may have known this building if you know Prague. It's in the Device district of Prague, behind the castle district. It's a pretty phenomenal building. It was designed in the 70s, but opened in 1981. It was fitted out with high-quality fitting fixtures. So this is a strange paradox. This is communist-era luxury. And in a way, I think it tells us a lot about the privatization operating in Eastern Europe underneath communist rule. These were spaces that only the elite had access to. But of course, at the end of communism, this building changes hands. I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. It became property of Prague City Council, 1992, and for a short while was public space. If you were a citizen of the city, you could go swimming in the swimming pool of this hotel. And then in 2002, this hotel was sold off to a private owner, Falcon Capital, which is a company that is largely funded with Russian money, with strong connections to the oil energy industries of Russia. Then it was sold again to a Maltese company, and then it was sold one more time to a guy called Petr Kellner, who is the richest man in the Czech Republic. And he decided that he would demolish this building and turn it into a private home and also a private school. Now, this caused a lot of controversy. You can imagine architectural historians were saying this was a significant building and we should preserve it. But I'm particularly interested in this protest. These are protests drawn to this building by, I suppose we might call them, anti-capitalist activists. And they're carrying a banner here that says, "Racketeer destroys Prague." And I think this word Vexlak or racketeer has a very specific association for anybody in Eastern Europe post-89. Racketeers are the people who did deals to get benefits of public resources into their private hands. This is about the privatized interests of capital. And here, the problem with the building has got a lot to do not so much with its communist past, but with its capitalist present. So there were protests at the building. There were also protests outside Kellner's headquarters, his own business, again making this accusation. But what's equally interesting is we have protesters against Kellner, and then we have protesters against the protesters against Kellner. So at the same meeting, We have a group of counter-demonstrators who turn up wearing masks of Brezhnev, as you can see here, Stalin, there's also Castro. And they pretend to be communists, functionaries, and they say, we must defend Prague Hotel. So it's a kind of ironic, a very cheap accusation, I think, that's made here, that anybody who is anti-capitalist in this moment is effectively pro-Soviet or pro-Soviet style communism. And this same group of counter-demonstrators use the same mechanisms. They use social media. This Facebook page supports the demolition of the inefficient, megalomaniacal communist building, the Hotel Prague in Davica. So there's a kind of symmetry at work here, a kind of mirroring that these activists and these anti-activists look quite similar. And I think in a way this counter-demonstration is to render this building the past. And if it's the past, it deserves destruction. Here's another form of highly emotive activism. We're back at Hotel Cracovia. And again, we have a kind of mixed group of activists, architects, also in this case, people who are interested in citizens' rights. And they're very fretful about the impact of what a shopping centre and hotel complex will do to the city of Krakow.
Hotel Cracovia! Hotel Cracovia! Hotel Cracovia!
So this was organised, this event, which is Greed of the City, or Greedy City, by an artist called Cecilia Malik. She's an environmental artist from Krakow, and she worked with Mateusz Okonski and Marta Sala. And they organised this kind of public manifestation in front of the building. 300 people carrying signs that talk about the chichibosh of the greed of the city. So it's also an accusation that the mayor of the city, who is prepared to take this money, here we see euros and dollars, in exchange for the destruction of the hotel. And of course, what's operating here is very playful, it's very theatrical, it's designed to attract the attention of the media. I think it's also playing to a kind of fashion sensibility which likes these buildings of the 1950s and 60s. But play is not the only mechanism at work here. The same group also published social media, many of the legal and economic documents that they can find about the interests at work in the destruction of the hotel. And very often these documents are trying to demonstrate a connection between a political class and a business class. So this is a quote, one of those activists. Huge players, national level like Griffin and Ecker, these are development companies, can evil influence votes in Parliament. They have direct contact with politicians, with those who are empowered to pass legislation. So the stakes are quite high here. Now, I don't want to overplay this too much, but it is clear that many of these attempts to save these communist-era buildings come from the left. Some of the most vocal champions for Hotel Praha come from anti-capitalist activists that are represented by this magazine, Solidarita. Here's a quote from it. Organisation of events which promote the preservation of Hotel Praha significant, not only because they attempt to save a unique building, but also because they direct anger of people. And of course, there's an irony here, of course. Anti-capitalists campaigning to save a luxury hotel. But that irony is not lost on those activists. They understand the paradox. And as I come really to the last part of this talk, I'm just going to show you another one of these sort of dark ironies at work by looking at another social media site, a site which is called Art Wars. It largely functions through social media like Twitter. It's active in the Czech Republic, and it's a kind of online campaign against the creep of commercial architecture. And it's fronted by this guy, who is a kind of persona. He calls himself Arch Vader. So we're going to now just see Arch Vader, and I'll describe what he's saying. This is from an attempt to respond to plans to demolish small 1960s era modernist railway station in Havířov, a factory town near Szczecin. It's a very small, rather beautiful structure that in the Czech art history is called the Brussels style, because late modernism, this contemporary style, was most successful at the Expo 58 in Brussels.
České dráhy a město normálně nechali halu chátrát. Asi proto.
So here the voiceover suggests that the Czech railway company is letting the building fall to pieces. But then he admits himself, says, I'm a bit stinky at the end of every day. And all I need is a bit of wash and care. So maybe Havířov station ought to have a little wash and care as well. The same website and social media, these animations, is used to attack local politicians. Here he attacks the Minister of Culture, the Mayor of Havířov, somebody we don't know from Czech Railway, and the Minister of Transport. I think all those architects are all accused of allowing this building to fall into ruin, refusing to list this building to provide commercial opportunity. And hidden behind this is very typical. Is also a kind of odd connection between money coming from Brussels for new development, which kills the Brussels of 1958, Havířov station. I'll just let you watch the final scene. So what's very evident to me is that this communist era hotels, railway stations, supermarkets included, they've become highly symbolic and very charged objects in discussions. And the discussion really isn't about the balance sheet of the communist past, about what was good and bad, about the world before 1989. It's a discussion that is about how public is public space. It's a question about who owns the resources of society. It's about privatization of things that were once held in common. It's perhaps also about what Henri Lefebvre once called rights to the city in the face of a kind of neoliberal economy that's operating. So I've shown you various forms of ludic and playful protest using humour. And I guess we have to ask, how effective are these protests? Is all of this effort worthwhile? Because we see modernist buildings being destroyed all the time in Central Europe. This is a major department store. Central Warsaw, a very significant building that comes just before Socialist realism. And you can see its state last week. It's been completely stripped back to its frame. And the plan is to build a facsimile building, which you can see ghosting here, this mesh advertising. There will be a facsimile copy of at least the street side of this building. But there's a lot of suspicion about the restitution of the building, because you can see from its original form here, it had a very small service block behind it. And now the developer is planning to really occupy a very major site, the center of downtown Warsaw. So there's a kind of sense in which maybe a lot of these attempts to promote these buildings are being obscured by this kind of screen, quite literally here. This historic building, it's going to be the screen for a much larger development. There are some significant changes, I think, and one that I'd like to point to is to do with the attitudes of architects. I detect a mood change, particularly in Poland, amongst architects. A few years ago, architects were very strongly leading the calls for the demolition of socialist era architecture. And they would very often point to the very poor state of the buildings, their leakiness, their rustiness, as evidence for the need to destroy them. But a major project in recent years was to revitalize the railway stations in the center of Warsaw in time for the Euros in 2012. And the attitude of architects to these small historic pavilions, which run through the center of the city, is very interesting. This is from the architect who was charged with working this building, which is Stadion, near the football stadium in Warsaw. And he says, my first idea was to generate new quality. And I think what he meant by that was a new building. But he said, working together with the Preservation Office, we started to look into the history of the building, looking at images like this, which were so different to the state of the building in the years 2000, 2001 and 2002. And then, he says, the idea emerged to restore the building and to unveil its original appeal, which is what they did. So this architectural project became a restoration project. And I think it also revealed something else, which is that the poor quality of this building, its poor state, was not a product of socialism, but was to do with the depressed economies of the 1990s, when a kind of Russian market took over. It was actually to do with the very primitive forms of capitalism which operated in Warsaw after 1989. So this idea of cleaning up the building has echoes elsewhere. Avizhov is now, the railway station is the center of a kind of campaign being led by architects, where they've turned it into a communal center, where they have concerts organized, and where they organize the cleaning of the building. Very kind of simple prospect to clean the building. But I would call this a project of re-enchantment, somehow reviving the enthusiasm of the city for the building. And that's interesting to me because it begs the question, what is an architect in this situation? Maybe this architect tool is more like an activist or community organizer. So really, just as I end, I think we have to ask this question, what is the effect of all of these campaigns? And might even these ghosts that I'm describing, like this sort of structure that picks up mullions in the windows of the glass of the curtain wall, might that be one of these effects of campaigns? That all of the emotion that these increasingly to generate is being tapped by an architect like Dunakovsky. That these ghosts that we see are sometimes to do with architects trying to demonstrate their care for place, their care for history. They're being accused of being greedy, so they need to make gestures in return. And in a way, this has got much more to do with the logic of branding. I think this is architecture of kind of branding. It's not placemaking in a way that's meaningful to me, anyway. But I think equally we need to look at it from the other end and ask this question about effectiveness. And I think there's a problem here with persistence of images, of superheroes, golden calves. This is all predicated on the idea that images can change attitudes, that images can hold developers, local authorities, even architects up to account in the court of public opinion. And I think on this, actually, many of these preservationists that I've talked to themselves are quite doubtful, know the limits of what they can do. Because it points in the end to a kind of lack of symmetry in terms of power and resources. On the one hand, we have action, we have playfulness, the carnivalesque, we have enchantment. And on the other side, of course, we have efficiency, utility, this persistent rhetoric of modernization. Thank you very much.